I will start, thank you. I would not necessarily say that I'm obsessed with Hamilton, but my wife noticed a Facebook meme about a year ago and said that it applied. My thoughts have been replaced entirely by Hamilton lyrics. And there's not just a few lyrics. In the show, there are 20,520 words. And that compares to just under 7,000 words in Phantom of the Opera. And in 1776, a prior take on the Founding Fathers musical, 2,735 words. So Lin-Manuel Miranda in the show takes on the sweep of life, focused through a lens of politics, but the songs come in several cycles that touch on universal themes that we're going to look at: ambition, love, betrayal, loss, legacy. And I will try to break that down into different groups and show it for you today. But in short, the show is just different. So let's begin. When the greatest show in Broadway history starts with a question, the question deserves an answer. How does a bastard orphan, son of a whore, and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by Providence, and listen to everything that is stacked up against our hero, not just today, but against him in the late 18th century, all of these things. Impoverished and squalor grow up to be a hero and a scholar. And I submit that the show answers this with three responses. Each is a virtue, but as you will see, when combined with Hamilton's pride, it's the root of his downfall. Ambition, he's a scrapper born at the bottom, yearning to make a mark. But ambition is not enough to get where he's going without determination, relentless pursuit of a worthy goal. But the final key piece and what comes through so well early in the show is education. Ambition and determination will fall short without that. And our founders assumed that they spoke to an educated citizenry. Madison attended Princeton, Jefferson, William, and Mary. Hamilton went to King's College, now Columbia. And we're going to see a real war in this show, but really what it was a war of ideas. And if you look at the paper that I've handed out, paired with the first song is a document from Noah Webster, that Noah Webster of America's first dictionary. He was a friend of Hamilton's, and he wrote a Federalist newspaper in New York in the 1790s. And he says, "But every child in America should be acquainted with his own country. He should read books that furnish him with ideas that will be useful to him in life and practice. As soon as he opens his lips, he should rehearse the history of his own country. Every class of people should know and love the laws. This knowledge should be diffused by means of schools and newspapers, and an attachment to the laws may be formed by early impressions upon the mind." But as I said, Miranda answers his opening question also with ambition. And I will finish this, and I think that we're ready to go. We will return to Mr. Burr in just a second, but the second song, Aaron Burr, Sir, introduces them both and lays bare the young Hamilton's ambition on arrival to New York. And with this song, we see Miranda's first direct link to a document, the one that I pair with this, where explicit words in the songs come from something in history. God, I wish there was a war. And the letter that you see is one that Hamilton wrote at age 14, still on Nevis, already clear about the arc he had planned for his life and the source from whence success might come. Nettie, we have seen such schemes successful when the projector is constant, and I shall conclude saying, I wish there was a war. And with no further ado, I think Medley is here, ready to go? All right.
Grow up to be a hero.
That was amazing. Thank you very much. All right. So, moving on. We're talking about ambition, but it's not just Hamilton's ambition that animates the show. It's the clash of that ambition with Jefferson and Madison, and most importantly, with Aaron Burr. These three together are Hamilton's nemesis in Act Two. But the remarkable thing is that no one is a villain in this show. No one's pure villain. Even Burr, who concludes the opening song with the classic line, "Me, I'm the damn fool that shot him," he is treated with understanding and indeed kindness. Now, Wait for It is a song well into the first act, and it's purely about Burr's own ambition rolling into the Revolutionary War. I could not find many online sources for Aaron Burr. The National Archives has 49, compared to Hamilton, 7,632. Take that, Burr. But this one sets the tone, what you see here. Burr is miffed that younger men could possibly be promoted higher than him in the military. And it is a cringeworthy letter of complaint to George Washington. And if you look at just some of the lines, you see what a grasper and climber he is. "I would beg to know whether it was any misconduct in me or extraordinary merit or services in them which entitled the gentleman lately put over me to that preference." So he wants to be at the top. He thinks, he believes he is at the top. But going back to song 3, and My Shot, we add determination to the education and ambition trifecta. By the song's end, we are introduced to all of our Act 1 heroes, each of whom the actor becomes a conflicted role, a different person in Act 2. Hercules Mulligan, our hulking tailor's apprentice and spy, goes on to portray James Madison. The sleek Marquis de Lafayette goes on to be the equally smooth Thomas Jefferson. And John Laurens, Hamilton's best friend, will die before Act 1 concludes and go on to be the equally doomed Philip Hamilton in Act 2. And by the way, there will be spoilers in this talk. But, for instance, Burr kills Hamilton in a duel. But, you know, this is history 250 years ago, and you should have picked it up from American history if you'd paid attention. In any event, My Shot sets the shift to a next group of songs about the Revolution. In 1774, our founders wanted to be more English, not less, and they believed themselves born to an enlightened England deserving of all the rights of the English, from Magna Carta through to the Bill of Rights, Petition of Right, and beyond. The Declaration and Resolves from the First Continental Congress is the document I have there, and it could not have been more direct about this, while also trying to maintain, still in 1774, a veneer of loyalty to the crown. But they have different resolves. And resolve number 1, we are entitled to life, liberty, and property, and we have never ceded to any foreign power whatever a right to dispose of either without their consent. And goes on saying, this is our birthright as English citizens. The story of tonight would only be a classic drinking song among buddies in a bar if it wasn't for the message that Miranda gives to our heroes. Raise a glass to freedom, something they can never take away, no matter what they tell you. George Mason is not a character in Hamilton, but I'm going to return to him several times today. He was one of the great thinkers and orators on freedom, liberty, and our founders' belief in natural law, principles of reason that connect all of these things. And in June of 1776, he would be the primary draftsman of the Virginia Declaration of Rights. But a year before that, he was right on target, and he matches our hero's toast in the songs, where he says, "We came equals into this world, and equals shall we go out of it. All men are by nature born equally free and independent. Every society, all government, every kind of civil compact, therefore, is or ought to be calculated for the general good and safety of the community." With our heroes properly introduced, it's time to meet our heroines in the time of revolution, the Schuyler sisters. Angelica, Eliza, say it with me, and Peggy. Their song notes the different treatment of women and men in these times. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and when I meet Thomas Jefferson, I'm a compel him to include women in the sequel." Work. Miranda paid attention to not just this disparity, but again and again to slavery and unjust treatment of blacks in America. 3 months before the Declaration of Independence, Abigail Adams also gave a healthy earful to her husband, John. In this letter you see here, I long to hear that you've declared an independency, and by way in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. Men of sense in all ages abhorred those customs which treat us only as vassals of your sex. Regard us then as beings placed by providence under your protection and imitation of the Supreme Being. Make use of that power only for our happiness. Song 6 is titled Farmer Refuted, and its source is literally to a political tract that brought Hamilton to prominence at the age of 20. The elaborate title of my speech and of the paper today is in fact a homage to Hamilton's own full title, some of which said, The Farmer Refuted, or a more partial and incomprehensive view of the dispute between Great Britain and the colonies, intended as a further vindication of the Congress in answer to a letter from A.W. Farmer entitled, A View of the Controversy Between Great Britain and Her Colonies, etc. Now that is a proper title. You really don't even need to read it after that. But the farmer, by pseudonym, had argued that loyalty and patient submission were the colony's only option. And Hamilton exploded that notion in The Farmer Refuted, which itself provides the link and the basis for what became the aspirations of the preamble. It's long been the fifth document that I teach in my class on origins, and I've provided an excerpt there, but here's another quote that shows why our hero is going to meet his fate in a duel. The spirit that breathes through this other paper is so rancorous, illiberal, and imperious. The argumentative part of it so puerile and fallacious. The misrepresentations of facts so palpable and flagrant. The criticism so illiterate, trifling, and absurd. The conceit so low, sterile, and splenetic that I will venture to pronounce it one of the most ludicrous performances which has been exhibited to public view during all of the present controversy. Age 20, he speaks his mind. But the last of the Songs of Revolution is the first of 3 appearances by King George III. All alone each time, he takes center stage and genuinely commands the audience. You'll Be Back is kind of a vampy, glam breakup song, petulant sorrow at being spurned by the colonies, and he's kind of like this creepy global stalker in the centuries before Facebook. And then not everyone in England shared the King's view. And I pair this song with Edmund Burke's famous speech to the Parliament on conciliation with the colonies. Burke provides various reasons why what he calls a fierce spirit of liberty has grown up in the colonies, and these include descent, ancestry tracing to England and English rights, a form of government, democratic representation in Parliament, religion with respect for rules and law, education, particularly education in the law. And taking note of this, he says, the flame that is ready to consume us. Burke notes the real question at hand. Perhaps we might wish the colonists to be persuaded that their liberty is more secure when held in trust for them by us as their guardians than with any part in their own hands. But the question is not whether their spirit deserves praise or blame, but what, in the name of God, shall we do with it? And King George in the song provides a ready answer to that question. I will send a fully armed battalion to remind you of my love. And with this, it takes us to a first cycle of songs in the Revolutionary War, itself on themes of struggle and deprivation. And it's here at this point that we meet the general, George Washington, and right-hand man. He enters racked by self-doubt, and yet the consummate leader, aware that the weight of war and a new way of life rests on his shoulders. Can I let down my guard and tell the people how I feel a second? The elephant is in the room. The truth is in your face when you hear the British cannons go boom. In my shot, Miranda has Hamilton saying, this is not a moment, it's the movement. But in 1783, at the conclusion of the war, at the moment of ultimate triumph, Washington sent the included circular to the states. And this, he said, that point was the moment to claim the real prize for which we had been fighting. when we consider the magnitude of the prize we contended for, the doubtful nature of the contest, and the favorable manner in which it has terminated, we shall find the greatest possible reason for gratitude and rejoicing. At this auspicious period, the United States came into existence as a nation, and if their citizens should not be completely free and happy, the fault will be entirely their own. Moving into the war, as we know, there was suffering and sacrifice throughout it all, and Stay Alive is a song about that. A harsh winter at Valley Forge, no clothes, no food, and in the song Washington sings, the cavalry's not coming. And Hamilton pens, we have resorted to eating our horses. And Washington's plea to Congress for aid, he through Hamilton writes, for some days past there has been little less than famine in the camp. And though he admires their incomparable patience and fidelity to soldiery, Washington fears these sufferings at some point will lead to general mutiny and dispersion. And our forces endure a string of losses, or at best stalemates, and a loss of confidence. And with 10 dual commandments, General Charles Lee fails at the Battle of Monmouth and is replaced by the Marquis de Lafayette. And Lee starts talking smack about Washington. So John Lawrence steps up with Hamilton as his second for a duel. Now, Burr serves as Lee's second in the show. That's a dramatic license to place our central characters together on the dueling grounds in Act 1, where they're going to meet again at the conclusion of Act 2. The song sets out 10 rules for duels, but there apparently is an 11th. The seconds will agree to a narrative of what is called an affair of honor. The circumstances will be explained, and as voluntary conduct among gentlemen, regardless what happens, a crime shall not have occurred. At least that's the theory. I include the narrative penned by Alexander Hamilton and Major Edwards, which tracks very well to the show on stage. And there's also one for the Hamilton-Burr affair, written 25 years later by Nathaniel Pendleton and William P. Van Ness, if you want to look it up. But amidst the songs of war and deprivation, Hamilton's chafing at being sidelined from the action, merely as a Washington secretary. Now, he did not throw away his shot to be the right-hand man of the moral and military leader of the fight, but he still wants to be in that war that he wished for as a child on Nevis. In a reprise of the story of tonight, Hamilton tells Burr, I wish I had your command instead of manning George's journal. And in a letter to General Philip Schuyler, who by 1781 was Hamilton's father-in-law, he writes, I always disliked the office of an aide-de-camp as having it a kind of personal dependence, ambition and determination always, and really wanting independence for himself, which sets up a conflict with Washington himself. And you see by song 16, with Meet Me Inside, Hamilton's need to be his own man, to earn his own place and his own level of respect comes between him and Washington. Miranda places their break dramatically as the result of the Lawrence-Lee duel. The actual history hasn't quite the same flair, but Hamilton does recount it with a bit of overwrought drama in the attached letter. The great man and I have come to an open rupture. Proposals of accommodation have been made on his part, but rejected. I pledge my honor to you that he will find me inflexible. He shall for once at least repent his ill humor. Without a shadow of reason and without the slightest ground, he charged me in the most affrontive manner with treating him with disrespect. I answered very decisively, Sir, I'm not conscious of it, but since you have thought it necessary to tell me so, we part. And so he takes his leave. And amidst the war, we have an interval. Young men are in combat, but another cycle of songs rises on love. It is time for them to pitch some woo. In A Winter's Ball, Burr is jealous of Hamilton's ascendancy, but he's smart enough to ask at the outset, what do we have in common? We're reliable with the ladies. By 1779, John Lawrence has decamped to fight the war in South Carolina. Hamilton sends him the attached letter deputizing Lawrence to find him a wife, one that shows the depth of their friendship, and perhaps more than a hint that Hamilton is going to prove to be a difficult husband. I have plagues enough without desiring to, do I want a wife? No. I have plagues enough without desiring to add to that number the greatest of all. And if I were silly enough to do it, I should take care how I employ a proxy. Do I mean to show my wit? If I did, I'm sure I have missed my aim. But with helpless and satisfied amidst the winter's ball, Hamilton meets the two great loves of his life, Elizabeth and Angelica Schuyler. Both are daughters of the great general, Philip Schuyler, later a New York senator. Hamilton writes Eliza, but now we are talking of times to come. Tell me, my pretty damsel, have you made up your mind upon the subject of housekeeping? Do you soberly relish the pleasure of being a poor man's wife? In a later song, he uses that from a letter. In That Would Be Enough, Hamilton sings, will you relish being a poor man's wife, unable to provide for your life? And Eliza responds, as she always does, I relish being your wife. And in a song from deep in Act 2, Eliza recalls the power of Hamilton's love letters to her, singing, your sentences left me defenseless, you built me palaces out of paragraphs. I recount one letter here which concludes from him, my heart overflows with everything for you that admiration, esteem, and love can inspire. Let it awake your sympathy, and let our hearts melt in a prayer soon to be united, never more to be separated. But we also have Hamilton's intellectual kinship with Angelica Schuyler. She serves as the perfect complement for Hamilton's ambition and gives him a confidant throughout the show. The letter I've included is of no real import apart from its conclusion, which shows their affinity. I have a great opinion of your discernment, and therefore I venture to rant. If you read this letter in a certain mood, you will easily divine that in which I write it. Woo having been successfully pitched, the Revolutionary War remains to be won, and our cycle of songs moves on to a theme of victory. Guns and Ships brings Washington and Lafayette and the colonies in France together in the fight for independence. Historically, this also incites the more savage fight for independence in France 10 years later that complicates the political alliances in the Washington administration in Act 2. The first letter I've paired is just to show the genuine admiration Washington has for his new friend, Lafayette. But the meaning of the second letter cannot be mistaken. Washington writes, the arrival of Marquis de Lafayette opens a prospect which offers the most important advantages to these states if proper measures are adopted to improve it. He announces an intention of his court to send a fleet and army to cooperate effectually with us, guns and ships, and so the balance shifts, as the song says. Miranda almost miraculously links historical documents to the ideas that he's animating his songs with and driving forward the narrative. History Has Its Eyes on You is the next song, and it's a deceptively simple one, and it's perhaps my favorite in the entire show. It sums up all that was George Washington and why he is the single irreplaceable founder of what America would become. He's ambitious, but not personally ambitious. He lays down power 3 times where anyone else would have seized it or kept it. At the conclusion of the Revolutionary War, he returns his sword to Congress. On the collapse of the Articles of Confederation, he leads the Constitutional Convention because otherwise he would be named monarch. And after 8 years as president, he peacefully turns power back over to the people and their next chief executive. He sings, let me tell you what I wish I'd known when I was young and dreamed of glory. You have no control who lives, who dies, who tells your story. That final line is actually the title of the show's final song. I present it here with Washington's general orders to the troops 2 days before the Declaration of Independence is signed. And I say that this is a war speech that rivals William Shakespeare in Henry V before the Battle of Agincourt, or Mel Gibson in Braveheart before the Battle of Stirling Bridge, or John Belushi in Animal House before the homecoming car parade. The fate of unborn millions will now depend under God on the courage and conduct of this army. Our cruel and unrelenting enemy leaves us no choice but a brave resistance or the most abject submission. This is all we can expect. We have therefore to resolve to conquer or die. The general recommends to the officers great coolness in time of action, and to the soldiers a strict attention and obedience with a becoming firmness and spirit. And so it is finally victory at the Battle of Yorktown, when the world turned upside down. I set out letters and journal entries from Hamilton and Washington at the conclusion of the long, months-long and difficult siege, waged from June to October of 1781. But words cannot do justice to this song. On stage, it is the showstopper of the show. At the 2016 Tony Awards, this is the song that the original cast performs. It is available on YouTube. I urge you to seek it out. It's almost as good as Medley was doing Alexander Hamilton, but it is worth seeing. But as so often with turns of event in this show, great victory also brings a bitter loss. Here for both Hamilton and, in his estimation, America. With song 23, Tomorrow There'll Be More of Us, John Laurens is cut down in his home state of South Carolina in one of the final skirmishes of the war. And it is said that Hamilton wrote just once of the death of his dear friend and confidant and never spoke of it again. I feel the deepest affliction at the news we've just received of the loss of our dear and inestimable friend Laurens. His career of virtue is at an end. The world will feel the loss of a man who has left few like him behind, an America of a citizen whose heart realized that patriotism of which others only talk. I feel the loss of a friend I truly and most tenderly loved, and one of a very small number. With the war won, though, King George returns to the stage to ask, what comes next? And to signal our next big transition to songs of creation. He sings, do you have a clue what happens now? And it turns out we did not. The Articles of Confederation loosely amalgamated the newly freed states in 1781, and they were a speedy and abject failure precisely because we lacked an energetic national government. There was no chief officer, there was no supreme judicial body, and there's no ability to really take any action of consequence without unanimity from all of the states, and good luck getting that. So to establish the need for a new constitution required absolute proof of the impending collapse and danger posed by that of the current government. And on that score, Hamilton delivers. Here's where we begin to look at several of the Federalist papers. And number 15 sets up the problem. We may indeed with propriety be said to have reached almost the last stage of national humiliation. There is scarcely anything that can wound the pride or degrade the character of an independent nation which we do not experience. This is the melancholy situation to which we have been brought by those very maxims and counsels which would now deter us from adopting the proposed Constitution. Throughout 15 and the Federalist Papers on either side, he lays out all of the problems. And after independence, difficult work lay ahead. But Miranda reduces this task to very human terms with the birth of Burr's eldest daughter and Hamilton's eldest son in the song Dear Theodosia. It is a perfect lullaby, provides a metaphor for the birth of our country. If we lay a strong enough foundation, we will pass it on to you, we'll give the world to you, and you'll blow us all away. The reason that the Federalist Papers are so persuasive is because Hamilton never soft-pedaled or nuanced his intent. He declared it and argued it in the plainest terms, knowing that he and his fellow framers were creating an entirely new form of government, which had to be adaptable to exigencies in the hands of later trusted representatives of the people. And in Federalist 34, he gives flight to that vision. In pursuing this inquiry, we must bear in mind that we are not to confine our view to the present period, but to look forward to remote futurity. Constitutions of civil government are not to be framed upon a calculation of existing exigencies, but upon a combination of these with the probable exigencies of ages according to the natural and tried course of human affairs. And this is what Hamilton has been aiming at. Jumping back to Song 17, in the midst of the war and Hamilton's break from Washington, Hamilton was already communicating with Congress and mapping out what this new government needed to be and what it needed to be able to do. That would be enough is actually Eliza's great love song to Hamilton, consoling him. But within it, she understands the man she has married. I don't pretend to know the challenges you're facing, the worlds you keep erasing or creating in your mind. All the way back in 1780, with a lengthy letter to a friend in the Continental Congress, Hamilton outlined the defects in the conduct of the war and the weakness of a loose amalgamation of states. I've only skimmed the surface of the different subjects I've introduced. Should the plans recommended come into contemplation in earnest and you desire my further thoughts, I will endeavor to give them more form and particularity. I, who have seen all the workings and progress of the present discontents, am convinced that a want of this has not been among the most inconsiderable causes. Hamilton remembered the lessons of the deprivation that he saw in the war, and 7 years later, beginning in 1787, is where he brought it to bear. With Song 24, we conclude Act 1 with the Constitutional Convention and the writing of the Federalist Papers themselves. Nonstop is another showstopper, bringing the curtain down on Act 1. For reference, I simply set out the opening passage from Hamilton in Federalist number 1 and the closing passage in the final paper, Federalist 85. It is said of Hamilton many times in the show that the man is nonstop, and there is a reason. I'm sure you've all looked at quite a number of the Federalist Papers. These are not simple tracts. They are political works of unrelenting genius. And get this, the Constitutional Convention ends on September 17, 1787. Hamilton publishes the first Federalist paper on October 27. And then in November, he publishes on November 14, 17, 20, 21, 24, 27, and 28. And then in December 1, 4, 5, 12, 14, 18, 19, 21, 22, 25, 26, and 28. That's 20. And he publishes another 31 of the Federalist Papers before May 28, 1788. This was all to get New York's vote, the center of trade and commerce. If it had said no, the Union would have failed. Not its most powerful commerce source, and the United States is split in half geographically. Hamilton engineered the papers to deliver that vote, and the delegates ratified by a margin of 30 to 27. A 3-vote margin secured the success of the United States and the Constitution. Nonstop. That's why it's said. The last of the songs of creation brings Thomas Jefferson home in the first song of Act 2. And he asks, "What did I miss while away as minister to France?" Now, Jefferson was not at the Constitutional Convention, but he followed the work in close communication with his protege, ally, and mentee, James Madison. The first of the letters I have from Jefferson to Madison sets out his approval but concern about the new Constitution. I will now add what I do not like. First, the omission of a Bill of Rights protecting clearly and without aid of sophisms, freedom of religion, press, protection against standing armies, monopolies, eternal and unremitting force of habeas corpus, trials by jury, etc. Let me add that a Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government on earth, general or particular, and that no just government should refuse or rest on inference. The second letter sets out Jefferson's vision that the Constitution, or his hope, that it be quickly ratified and then immediately amended to include a Bill of Rights. And that is, in fact, what came to pass, with James Madison being the primary author of the Bill of Rights. And now we move into a first cycle of songs on politics, and I'm going to do the cabinet battles one after another here. It's on a theme of aspiration during the Washington years. Now, it is amazing enough that 2 major songs in a Broadway show enact serious policy debates at the founding. And these are not the theatrical equivalent of watching a debate on C-SPAN. These songs are swaggering, trash-talking rap battles between Hamilton and his new nemesis, Jefferson. With Cabinet Battle 1, Miranda literally sets to music their competing views on the constitutionality of establishing a national bank. In my class on origins, we actually read and compare these competing letters by Jefferson and Hamilton to consider the effective limits on the necessary and proper clause, or rather, the boundaries on Congress to stay within its enumerated powers. Hamilton won that debate, and the federal government determined to assume state debts. This meant that the wealthy in the country, who had loaned their money to their individual states to support and fight the Revolutionary War, now had to rely on the national government to repay those debts. Suddenly, with Hamilton's vision, the most powerful in the country had a vested interest in wanting the national government to succeed. With the Federalist Papers, Hamilton had put the new Constitution on its feet with a fighting chance. With this new financial system, following Cabinet Battle I, he ensured that the nation would itself have the means to endure. Jumping a bit ahead narratively to Cabinet Battle II, we see the great debate that consumed Washington's second term. It concerned what was known as the quasi-war between England and France. France, obviously by treaty, had given us crucial support in the Revolutionary War, but the horrors of the guillotine were not lost on Americans. On the other hand, how could we trust and ally with England against the very country who came to our aid? Washington determined to follow a course of neutrality and avoid any entangling alliances. Hamilton defended this position under the pseudonym Pacificus, a disciple of St. Francis of Assisi and evoking peace. Jefferson dragooned Madison into replying as Helvidius, a Roman writer who had engaged in a heretical debate, just as Jefferson and Madison saw Hamilton's expansive view of executive power as heretical to the Constitution. And so barely 6 years after their pens had joined together as Publius and the Federalist, Hamilton and Madison now waged their eloquence against one another. Now, I, for one, would have been happy for the show to run to 4.5 or 5 hours. But Lin-Manuel Miranda did not have room for everything. It's not as if, as I said, that Miranda shied away from the topic of slavery. In the opening song, My Shot, it's there. In Cabinet Battle I, Hamilton says, a civics lesson from a slaver to Jefferson. Hey, neighbor, your debts are paid because you don't pay for labor. But Miranda toyed with the idea of a third cabinet battle, completing a trifecta with an early debate about slavery. It hit the cutting room floor, but Miranda published the lyrics, which I include as Song 33. Now, the entire show, by its very casting of mixed races to play all of our very white founders, spotlights the obvious problem and inconsistency at our founding. All of these faces, these talented individuals, these people would have been born slaves had things not changed. The compromise to secure entry of all 13 states into the new Constitution is a painful lesson that says history will set straight the path, but it should always be today's task. And it was a fact expressly recognized at the convention. George Mason said, every master of slaves, and this is debating one of the slavery clauses, every master of slaves is born a petty tyrant. They bring the judgment of heaven on a country. As nations cannot be rewarded or punished in the next world, they must be in this. By an inevitable chain of causes and effects, providence punishes national sins by national calamities. And in other speeches and talks, the punishment for that was the Civil War and everything on civil rights movement that has followed on that, how difficult it is to correct. But let's return to the policy debates in Washington's first term. Song 27, Take a Break. Jefferson and Madison are trying to keep power closer to the states, and insinuations begin creeping out that Hamilton, with his expansive view of national power, actually favors an American monarchy. Even as I say that, I wonder, how is this not the dorkiest show of all time? But it's not. It is an compelling and important conflict. Take a Break has Hamilton equate his plight to that of Macbeth. And I could not find whether such a letter actually exists to Angelica. But Miranda is not far from the mark, and we begin to see Hamilton's great learning and plans turn a bit towards paranoia and conspiracy. As he writes to a friend, it was not till the last session that I became unequivocally convinced of the following truth. Mr. Madison, cooperating with Mr. Jefferson, is at the head of a faction decidedly hostile to me and my administration and actuated by views, in my judgment, subversive to the principles of good government and dangerous to the union, peace, and happiness of the country. And it is a 12, 14-page screed about what is going on. But it is not just Hamilton that's become a bit paranoid about the competition between himself and Jefferson. It's there for Jefferson too. In Song 32, Jefferson frets, "It must be nice to have Washington on your side." And Washington is fully allied with Hamilton. And the divisions within the cabinet were plain to all. Every action has its equal opposite reaction. Thanks to Hamilton, our cabinet's fractured into factions. Try not to crack under the stress. We're breaking down like fractions. Jefferson's letter in 1810, after his own presidency, looks back and evokes the spirit of Washington's cabinet that Miranda captures so well via the rap battles. Jefferson writes, "In these discussions, Hamilton and myself were daily pitted in the cabinet like two cocks. We were then but 4 in number, and according to the majority, which of course was 3-1, the president decided. The pain was for Hamilton and myself, but the public experienced no inconvenience." And that's what it's about: favor, esteem, power, control. In Song 29, "The Room Where It Happens," is about the art of political compromise and who gets to participate in that decision. Thematically, Miranda very definitively sets up the resentment by Burr that Hamilton keeps somehow keeping him out of that room. But historically, the song deals with the compromise of 1790. Hamilton got his national bank approved, and at the same time, he gave the capital city essentially to Virginia with the support of the 2 Virginians, Jefferson and Madison. Article 1, Section 8 said there would be a capital city, not more than 10 miles square, but it did not say where it would be. The anti-federalist rant that I have here against even the concept of a seat of government for a new national government gives a colorful warning about all of this. "This city shall come to be where all the drones in society are to be collected to feed on the honey of the land. How dangerous this city may be and what its operation on the general liberties of this country, time alone must discover. But I pray God it may not prove to this Western world what the city of Rome, enjoying a similar constitution, did to the Eastern." The Anti-Federalists lost the overall debate, but that does not mean that all of their arguments missed the mark. In Schuyler Defeated, we have a brief song about the rise of the two-party system in American politics. And it is also about the fact that Aaron Burr used it to depose Hamilton's father-in-law as senator from New York. It is another point of growing tension between our protagonist and his antagonist. Unlike Burr, Schuyler was a celebrated general in the Revolutionary War. Apart from laying bare Burr's naked political ambition, it showed that in the battle of ideas, the best man may not always prevail. Madison warned even in the Federalist itself of the dangers of faction and party, and you see it there in Federalist number 10. And even today, we project a vain hope that the dangers of excess in this regard will abate. But they never do, or at least when they do, they don't abate for long. One last time marks the exit of George Washington from the stage, and it is one of the last showstoppers. The song is nothing other than the drafting and delivery of Washington's farewell address. And we know as students of history and politics that it is one of the classic political statements of all time. And we know as well that Hamilton was the one to take a pen to the first draft. "How far I have succeeded, you will judge," he writes Washington in the transmittal letter that I have put there. And it is with just a couple of tweaks that the final 2 paragraphs, as delivered by Washington, are sung through first by Hamilton until joined by and overtaken in the finale by Washington. "I anticipate with pleasing expectation that retreat in which I promise myself to realize without alloy the sweet enjoyment of partaking in the midst of my fellow citizens the benign influence of good laws under free government, the ever-favorite object of my heart and the happy reward, as I trust, of our mutual cares, labors, and dangers." Those are actually sung lyrics in the show that are quite moving. I hope that you've listened to it and are familiar with it. One last time, and George Washington is going home. We now move into a cycle of songs that are on politics and betrayal, and I'm going to go through these very quickly so that I can just set up the final and concluding songs. "I Know Him" is John Adams' entrance to the scene, and George III, That's that little guy who spoke to me all those years ago. What was it, 85? And of course, we know John Adams as Paul Giamatti from the show, John Adams. And then the betrayal. The Adams administration shows it. Adams and Hamilton, both Federalists, should have been allies, and instead they for various policy reasons, got crosswise with each other. And in the show and in reality, Hamilton does a devastating narrative takedown, 35-page letter that he delivers that essentially ends the Adams administration and any potential for Adams to continue further. But it begins the arc of Hamilton's downfall. And this traces back to early in Act Two with his affair with Maria Reynolds in 1792. She sings, "I know you're a man of honor." Hamilton's one of his love letters in 1780 bears unfortunate pre-echo of this when he says to Eliza, "I was once determined to let my existence and American liberty end together. My Betsy has given me a motive to outlive my pride. I'd almost said outlive my honor, but America must not be witness to my disgrace." And yet that is what is coming. Now, Burr plays a central role in all of this, but it is actually James Monroe. James Monroe is the one who found out, vets it to Hamilton in 1792, and then brings it back to the fore in 1796. The aim? It's a leak to keep Hamilton from becoming presidency. And note what happens. The leak works. The next three presidents are Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe, the three Virginians. And that's got to be the best leak in American political history. But leaking this affair, and then what comes with Hamilton's defense, is what takes him out and sidelines him. Hamilton's forced to endure a choice, not whether, but which disgrace to endure. He had paid off James Reynolds, the husband, to keep quiet. This money looked like he may have been embezzling funds to clear his name. Does he clear his name, or does he let the professional consequences fall, but keep the love and alignment of his wife? He decides to out all of that personally. It's devastating to Eliza, but he believes that he's clearing his name. And Miranda pairs all of this to the hurricane that devastated the island of Nevis when he was a child. And Hamilton's view, as in the song, is, when I was 17, a hurricane destroyed my town. And he talks about, I wrote my way out. I wrote my way to revolution. I was louder than the crack in the bell. All of these things that he's accomplished. He thinks he can write his way out again. And he does. The Reynolds pamphlet. But I said hubris before, and here's his title for the Reynolds pamphlet. Observations on certain documents contained in number 5 and 6 of the History of the United States for the year 1796, in which the charge of speculation against Alexander Hamilton, late Secretary of the Treasury, is fully refuted, written by himself. That's what he thinks is going to save him from disgrace and humiliation. He irretrievably damages Eliza's love for him, and pride, as it always does coming before the fall, puts him on the sidelines. Burn is Eliza's literal torch song. She's burning his love letters on stage, trying to move forward. And Hamilton, you see it in the letters from the time, I've been extremely uneasy. My beloved Liza, at the state of health and state of mind in which you left me, I earnestly hope that there has been a change of both for the better. But with those cycles of betrayal done, we go to pure tragedy, songs of loss. Hamilton's shame leads to the death of his eldest son, Philip, who dies in a duel defending his father's honor, and he uses his father's dueling pistols in doing so. On stage, Hamilton goes over the rules of honor with Philip in advance. What you see paired here with Blow Us All Away is literally Alexander's rules for Philip Hamilton in the study of law, his dictates for the way Philip should go about preparing himself to be a lawyer. Don't know if any of you have children yet. You will reach similar contracts for study with your own kids, I guarantee you. Maybe not for law school, but at least for elementary school. But Philip is lost. Think of Hamilton's struggle, all that he has overcome and withstood. And it is this death that he calls an event beyond comparison, the most afflicting of my life. Hamilton was comforted in his grief by Benjamin Rush, a good friend. Rush was the Surgeon General of the Continental Army during the Revolution. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence and a leader at the state's ratification convention. Hamilton writes to him, "My loss is great indeed. The highest as well as the eldest hope of my family has been taken from me. You estimated him rightly. He was truly a fine youth. But why should I repine? It was the will of heaven. He is now out of reach of the seductions and calamities of a world full of folly, full of vice, full of danger, of at least in proportion as it is best known." And following this death is the song, "It's Quiet Uptown," which is devastating to see. It is a tragic song of parental grief, but also of Hamilton's anguish at having also lost Eliza's love and trust. And there is little reference to God and religion in Hamilton. But Hamilton did not take his religion for granted. He simply kept it and his thoughts on it private. But with the loss of Philip, he sings, Miranda has him sing, "I take the children to church on Sunday, a sign of the cross at the door, and I pray." That never used to happen before. And Hamilton, in later years, turned more towards the comfort of religion. But this being Hamilton, he of course fused it with politics, proposing to form, as you see in the letter, the Christian Constitution Society. In my opinion, the present Constitution is the standard to which we are to cling. Under its banners, bona fide must we combat our political foes, rejecting all changes, but through the channel itself provided for amendments. Let an association be formed to be denominated the Christian Constitutional Society. Clearly, this is an idea that went nowhere. Today, we hardly have even a single organization like that participating in American politics. No, it was very prescient on what has often animated politics in the country. The final song of loss is one for Aaron Burr, the election of 1800. It's exceedingly complicated, his loss to Jefferson for the presidency. Without getting into the 12th Amendment and the way Article 2 originally set it up, there was a tie on the initial ballot. It gets tossed to the first Congress, actually the second Congress by this time, to decide and break the tie. Adams has lost decisively. We have a tie between Jefferson and Burr, but the Congress that's going to vote is majority Federalist. They're about to be swept out. It's going to be succeeded by backers of Jefferson, but the Federalists are going to get to pick. And so Miranda has them singing, "Dear Mr. Hamilton, your fellow Federalists would like to know how you'll be voting." Hamilton chose on principle, the man who believed in the nation and lasting future of the Constitution, one who would release power in the Washington model. Jefferson, even though they had locked horns on fundamental matters of policy, was a man of integrity that Hamilton trusted in that regard. And he did a massive takedown of Burr, indicting him as deficient in honesty, too happy to seize power, unlikely to relinquish it, and apt to abuse it when held. From a thorough knowledge of the character, I can pronounce with confidence that Mr. Burr is the last man in the United States to be supported by the Federalists. No, let the Federalists vote for Jefferson. And the show proceeds immediately to the duel. But what the historical fact is, Hamilton did it again to Burr in 1804. When it became clear that Jefferson is going to drop Burr from the next ticket, he announced to run for governor. And it's in that bitter smear campaign that Hamilton stated Burr to be a dangerous man, one who ought not to be trusted with the reins of government. This provoked a series of letters on stage that fly back and forth, literally fly back and forth between Burr and Hamilton. Burr demands a disavowal, he receives none, challenges a duel, Hamilton accepts. Hamilton left the attached statement of his motives about all of this should he not survive the engagement. It's not my design by what I have said to affix any odium on the conduct of Colonel Burr. I trust all the same that the world will do me the justice to believe that I have not censured him on light grounds or from unworthy inducements. And within the letter he says, I am thinking of casting away my first shot and perhaps my second. They closed their letters, Hamilton and Burr, with the usual formality of the day. I have the honor to be your obedient servant. In finding letters for this, I love it. It apparently was the closing letter of all the letters going back and forth between politicians of the day. But Hamilton also left a letter for Eliza that morning. And he closed with a variation he always used for her, which is the title of this song. And this is the letter that he left in his desk. This letter, my very dear Eliza, will not be delivered to you unless I shall have first terminated my earthly career to begin, as I humbly hope, from redeeming grace and divine mercy, a happy immortality. Adieu, best of wives and best of women. Embrace all my darling children for me. And we know that this letter was delivered later that day to Eliza. Hamilton does not survive what he called this interview with Burr. And we are on to the final cycle of songs, songs of legacy. As the bullet flies towards him on stage, time stops in the show. Hamilton reflects on the nature of his legacy, still in rhyme, but more in the form of a free association. Legacy, what is a legacy? It's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see. I wrote some songs at the beginning of I wrote the notes at the beginning of a song someone will sing for me. America, you great unfinished symphony you sent for me. I think that the speech national greatness captures it best. Gouverneur Morris was one of Hamilton's closest friends. He is credited with drafting the preamble. He was on the committee of style that reduced the convention debates to a first draft. And as of 1800, on the speech here, he was in the Senate. And he says, we are close to the true source and principle of national greatness. It is in this national spirit. It is in that high, haughty, generous, and noble spirit which prizes glory more than wealth and holds honor dearer than life. It is that spirit, the inspiring souls of heroes, which raises men above the level of humanity. When this spirit prevails, the government, whatever its form, will be wise and energetic, because such government alone will be borne by such men. I anticipate the day when, to command respect in the remotest regions, it will be sufficient simply to say, I am an American. And the final song opens, one who lives, who dies, who tells your story. Every other founding father story gets told. Every other founding father gets to grow old. And when you're gone, who remembers your name, who keeps your flame, who tells your story? Hamilton wrote to his friend Gouverneur Morris 2 years before the fatal encounter with Burr. He understood what he had created. He realized everything that he had lost, and he knew the very hard feelings he had left in his turbulent wake. And he writes, mine is an odd destiny. Perhaps no man in the United States has sacrificed or done more for the present Constitution than myself. And contrary to all my anticipations of its fate, as you know from the very beginning, I am still laboring to prop the frail and worthless fabric. Yet I have the murmurs of its friends and no less than the curses of its foes for my rewards. What can I do better than withdraw from the scene? Every day proves to me more and more that this American world was not made for me. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story? The opening song references divine providence, stacking the odds against Hamilton. And perhaps it was Providence that saw someone loan a copy of Ron Chernow's biography of Alexander Hamilton to Lin-Manuel Miranda, when he's trying to figure out a worthy follow-up to his Tony for his first Broadway musical, In the Heights. The story of genius in the hands of genius has rarely been told so well, and it has now been told in a way that it will never be forgotten. That's it. Thank you very much.